Welcome everyone. I hope you had a great session previously and yesterday. Hope you enjoyed it and learned from the discussion with our amazing speaker. And welcome to the Farm Animal Coalition session at AfA CONNECT November 2024. My name is Thanh. I'm honored to be moderating this session. As Elliot mentioned, we are going to discuss one of the forms of friction in our movement, which we just recently discussed in a very lively in the dog and cat coalition. As some of you might have been witnessing, even in the animal protection movement, people are divided. Animal abolitionist people oppose all the use of animals, while others are working hard and strategically to improve the welfare of billions of animals being kept and used by humans. And this can lead to frictions in the movement, as well as improvement might be seen as excusing and extending the animal suffering. Why the abolition may have been seen as unachievable. This session will provide opportunities to discuss this view and as well as to seek common ground in the whole animal protection movement. And in this session, we will be a little bit different from the previous session where we won't have any presentation. Instead, we will have the panelists who are here to express their opinion to some questions which we prepare for them in advance related to the theme. But we also are welcoming to any question from the audience. So you can use the chat box and add your question for our panelists. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our four amazing panelists in this session. The first panelist is Dr. Hannah Lassen. She is the Global Animal Welfare Advisor Animals in Farming for World Animal Protection. Hannah has a PhD in animal welfare science and has a background working with animals in scientific research, in zoos, and in farming. Her work in farm animals focuses on individual animals and improving welfare beyond minimum requirements. Through World Animal Protections, Hannah is leading a project developing global standards for chickens and pigs to live a good life. And our second panelist is Apurva, the founder and director of Animal Law and Policy Network, ALPN. And before starting ALPN, she worked as a research fellow in VD Center for Legal Policy, where she was a member in the Justice Access and Lowering Delays Initiative, GALDI for short. And at the GALDI, she worked in the areas of judicial reform and increasing access to justice. And previously, she has also worked with as a legal writer, where she wrote extensively about important legal developments and covered the Supreme Court, Delhi High Court, and various other tribunals. Apurva has also worked with VT as an associate fellow on a project to study the implementation of narcotic drugs, psychotropic substance acts in 1985 in Punjab. And in the animal law and policy space, Apurva received a full scholar to attend the animal law rights and representations summer school at the University of Antwerp in Belgium in July 2023. And previously, he also worked at the Center as a research collaborator for Harvard Law School Animal Laws Policy Program. Research initiative examining the nexus between animal trade and zoonotic disease. Apurva graduated from National Law University in Delhi in 2014. She also completed her Master in Laws from Punjab University in 2018 with a dissertation exploring the influence of animal rights and religions in India from legal perspective. Very welcome, Apurva and Hannah. The third panelist is Vada Mirocha. She's a co-founder and executive director of Samayu. Samayu is an organization pioneering intersectional action for advancing animal interests environmental sustainability, and public health. As the former executive director of FIAPO, she led it to national prominence, establishing it as one of the India leading animal charities. And prior to that, she spent several years organizing within the grassroots movement in Scotland. She writes regular on topics related to animal welfare and sustainable food system, and engages in global conversation on intersectionality, sustainability, and advancing animal welfare. Welcome, Vada. And our last fourth panelist is Jayasimha Nugehalli. He's the animal law. He's working with Animal Law Center at NASA School of Law. Jaya has nearly 20 years of experience in growing the animal welfare movement in Asia. Jaya has held significant roles, including Managing Director of Humane Society International India and Founding Director of the Animal Law Center at NASA School, University of Law, Hyderabad. Welcome, Jaya. Well, as you can see, for our panelists are quite experienced in their role and has lots of knowledge and experience in the movement. So I'm very excited to hear about your thought and opinion about the topic here today, the question, the friction that we introduced. But first, let's hear like what your view of like the definition. Let's go to the basic. What is animal abolition and what is animal welfare? What is veganism? So I hope that maybe I'll start with Vada. Can you help give a definition with about animal rights or animal abolition? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dan. And thank you, AFA, for organizing this session. Really great to be here and to be talking about this. So I think how I look at rights and welfare and veganism is that, or abolition and welfare and veganism is that with animal abolition, with the abolitionist approach, we are talking about the idea that fundamentally we cannot exploit animals. So the current human-animal relationship as it stands, and all the different things that we do to animals, whether use them in our food system or entertainment or experimentation, whatever it may be, none of it is acceptable. The human-animal relationship has to change, and we need to end all forms of animal exploitation. It's that fundamental recognition that animals have intrinsic value, and we need to recognize that, and our systems need to reflect that. So that's how I understand animal abolition. The vegan approach is a response to that, right? The vegan perspective rejects animal use, also all kinds of animal use, and it comes as a personal statement and as a personal thing that we do. That okay, well, I'm going to be vegan because I don't agree with all this animal exploitation that's happening, and I think it's also a political statement because we are defining, as all of us who identify as vegans, that this sort of animal exploitation is not acceptable, and this needs to change at a fundamental level. On veganism, the one thing that I do want to add is that there has also been this plant-based diet, and I think veganism as a diet only, and not as a philosophy, as a response to animal exploitation that happens. I think with Pardon me. I think with respect to veganism or a plant-based diet, we are really talking about also people who are engaging with veganism or trying or accepting or being vegan in different a month or longer or shorter or forever. Also from other perspectives, say for the perspective of environment or health, or I'll have better skin or a healthier body, or avoid hypertension, all sorts of diseases or environmental issues. The whole set of issues that come with animal farming and animal exploitation, but not so much animal exploitation itself. So it's not about a rejection of animal use entirely, but really the plant-based diet, particularly just looking at that perspective. So that's just sort of like, and I think that's the perspective that often also becomes a subculture around being a fad, or around being veganism for elites, or those sort of challenges. I think then come up, because then it starts getting seen as simply a diet. And I see nothing wrong with veganism being a diet. I think the more people who can go plant-based for whatever reason that they go plant-based is only a good thing for animals. And finally, with respect to animal welfare, how I see animal welfare is really a responsibility to the animals that exist in the here and now, to respond to the issues that are the conditions in which we keep animals, in which animals are across all different sorts of uses. Animal welfare really aims to improve those conditions. Animal welfare really aims to make those conditions better, so that the animals that are the large number of animals in unacceptable conditions that will have to continue to suffer until we achieve our aims of re-establishing a different human-animal relationship, which is not exploitative. Until that happens, we are also responding to the animals in the here and now with different interventions, and I'm sure we'll go more into some of the problems with that, with all of the different viewpoints, and try to, but I'll hold those points until later. I'll stick to definitions for now.
Thank you very much, Farah. And yeah, there's various definitions of veganism and animal abolitions, and you gave, a very insightful definition. Good one. Thank you very much. But I want to ask if there's any of the panelists want to add here. Okay. Approve that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry. I just wanted to add that the way I look at it, animal welfare is a path to abolition. So I think most of the people, in fact, I think all of the people in the movement do not want suffering for animals. They want the suffering to end. It's just our paths to get there and to end that suffering is different. Animal welfare, as Vardha said, looks at animals that are there in the world right now, and it's our responsibility to them to at least alleviate some of their suffering. Whereas I think abolitionism is a gradual process, and welfare emerges from the recognition that abolitionism is going to take time, but we cannot let these animals suffer in the conditions they're suffering in, and not do anything about it, because it is going to take time. So just wanted to add that.
Indeed. Thank you, Approver. And that's very much relevant to my second question, which I'll be would love to hear from Hannah and Jaya. In animal abolitionist view, animal welfare advocates are supporting and prolonging the suffering of animals. Is it true? Maybe Hannah, can you go first?
I'm happy to jump in here, and I want to add to the previous question within this as well. So, thinking about the definition of animal welfare, we know that my background is animal welfare science, and I'm working for World Animal Protection. So we're focused primarily on protecting animals' welfare and preventing suffering. And I think, everyone here has an understanding of animal sentience, and we know that animals are sentient, which means they have the ability to think and feel and have emotions that matter to them. It means that they can have experiences that will affect their future, and have the capacity to learn and make decisions about how they're going to behave in their environment. And when we think about animal welfare from an animal welfare science perspective and protecting animal welfare, it is all about the animal. So it is about the animals in the here and now, and it's understanding what the animal is experiencing, how they're choosing to respond to their environment. It's not about what we perceive is right or wrong to do with the animal. And so to me, that's the difference between animal welfare and an ethical position, which could be abolition, it could be veganism, it could be a number of other sorts of positions. So animal welfare is all about the animal and what the animal is experiencing and how they're perceiving their environment, whereas an ethical position is more about us and what we feel is appropriate to do with the animals. And so that, I think, think is a really interesting dynamic to look at, because they aren't mutually exclusive. One will lead from another. So we will have ethical positions which we will determine either as an individual or as a society based on our understanding of what animal welfare is and animals' experience within some sort of human-animal relationship. And we'll also drive our scientific understanding, our understanding of animal welfare based on what we feel is appropriate and inappropriate. And so when you're asking about whether or not we think animal welfare is prolonging suffering, I think that there is sometimes an argument to support that. If we think about incremental changes to animal welfare in some really severe scenarios, that might be something that, doesn't leave an animal living a good life. It leaves them living an adequate life, or a life that is okay. But when we think about animal welfare and what we're trying to do is prevent suffering, we're trying to use evidence-based, arguments and ideas to get us to the point that we're eliminating suffering. So we're understanding what an animal wants and what it needs, and is there a way in which this can be achieved within some sort of relationship, human-animal relationship. That doesn't necessarily mean that we wouldn't be utilizing animals in some form of a food system or entertainment or as domestic pets, but it does mean that we would be preventing their suffering. So I don't think that it is true that we're prolonging suffering by going down the animal welfare route. But I do think that there is a lot of nuance and a lot of grey area there, when sometimes we just don't know enough about animal welfare to understand what the suffering might be. And this is particularly true for these species that we know very little about. And so that's when we need to start looking at some ethical positions and making some judgment calls in the absence of some evidence. So I'll love to hear what the rest of the panel thinks about that one as well.
Sure. Thanks, Hannah. Thanks for having me. I think few things. Beyond the bubble of animal welfare activists, I think this question is moot. So for most people, the interaction that happens with their animals is through their wallet. And when people are making their choice of either purchasing a ticket to go watch an aquarium, or the food that they plan to eat, or the clothes that they're buying, they're not making this choice of, oh my God, am I being a welfare reformist? Am I being an abolitionist? I think that question is not typically a part of it. So I do think that we as a movement, I think we used to expend a lot more energy on this, maybe looking back 10, 15 years. But I'm kind of happy that we expend comparatively lesser amount of energy debating this philosophical thing about welfare, abolition, what helps, what does not help. Having said that, what we realize is once we recognize that most human interaction with an animal is through our wallets, the dominance of market comes into play. And market is a pure vigilante. It doesn't see ethics, it doesn't see morale, it doesn't see where your individual position is. The only two important players within a market is a demand and a supply. That's it. And these are the most absolute key players. And what we're really trying to see within all these positions that we're trying to figure out is how do we increase demand and it changed the human behavior or human interaction with its wallet towards animals, where we are causing the least amount of suffering. In some places, it could be through abolition, animals tested for cosmetics. It's one place where you could say, hey, you know what? The science is developed so well, we don't really have to use them at all. Or it could be in many forms where animals used for entertainment that we're seeing, be it with movies and films and so on and so forth. Where it gets really sticky is the animals were raised for food. And food has got such a complex relationship within the socio-geopolitics, many other considerations. So in that sense, I don't think it's as clearly black and white saying that because one is taking an abolitionist position, you're increasing the suffering, or because you're taking a welfarist position, you're actually decreasing suffering. Neither of this is that clear-cut thing to say that, okay, this is the position that we as a movement take, and that's the consequence of that particular position. It's a bit more complex. It depends on the geopolitics. And I'll give you a good example. Look at California. when Prop 12 took place in California, that's where, there was a ballot measure which was done as to whether sale of eggs from battery cages and pigs whose mothers are confined in gestation crates are illegal, to be made illegal. At that point of time, when you really look at the sale of cage-free eggs in California, only 6% of retail sales was cage-free. But overwhelming 68% of people, Californians who went and voted, said that they don't want to be, they want a law which will prohibit sale of eggs from cage in the state of California. So people vote differently from their wallet, people vote differently from their ballot. The issue is a lot more complex. And I feel like we as a movement are probably better off to step away from this in debate as to like, oh my God, you're a welfare reformist, you're an abolitionist, you're doing harm to the movement, you're doing good for the movement, and all this moral positioning, but to look at what is the most person's relation to an animal and how can we make that with the least amount of suffering. And that's the only point that matters.
Thank you very much, Jaya and Hannah, previously for your addition input. It's really it's great to for people to understand, like, again, basically people do care about the animal need, and the animal welfare activists, advocates are also working on that. And also the common ground is the capacity to suffer here, and everyone is trying to prevent it from happening with the farm animals. But indeed, the either the animal abolitionist or animal welfare, it's just human mind and human philosophy. So are there any common ground between the two philosophies that we are giving here? We are making these definition philosophies for the animals. Are there any common ground that like people can agree on, and what could they be? Any thought?
I can try and respond to that, and I can also perhaps add a couple of thoughts when on the previous question. And I think with regards to I think common ground is important. I think it's important to I think this is a very nuanced and complex issue, because animals are embedded, the use of animals is embedded in economic and social systems, and also with animal welfare itself can be quite nuanced, and I think one of the things that we need to be also unpacking a little bit as we, work within the movement is to really also look at, whether when we're talking about the animal welfare position, are we really talking about, the fundamental, because to me, the fundamental point is that we cannot be exploiting animals, but I think that's a sort of minimum. It's not so much about reducing suffering, but really about saying this, and that's, to be honest, I think most of the people who end up becoming animal advocates became animal advocates because at some point in time we were exposed to conditions that we found unacceptable. We said this cannot happen, and then you do different things. You become vegan and you start working and so on and so forth, and so I think that whether the position of animal welfare, whenever we're looking at an issue, whenever we're looking at an issue that we want to respond to, and we are thinking about different interventions, because that's really when these questions need to be asked. That's where we need to be asking ourselves as a movement, what's the best approach to a certain issue that comes up vis-a-vis animal exploitation and use. And I think in that context, I think first of all, establishing a fundamental baseline that ultimately we do not want any use of animals, whether it is now, later, whether welfare leads to reform and so on and so forth. But I think that's a fundamental minimal agreement. And I think on the basis of that, of course, we can, with the whole there's this argument that for 200 years we've been talking about welfare, but we haven't really changed the way that people look at animals. And compared to lots of other movements, 200 years is not that short a time to not even start making a dent in that vis-a-vis the relationship that we see with animals and the exploitation that is normalized currently. And I think also with happy meat, the way that happy meat can also lead to normalization of the use of animals. Certainly those are those are issues that we need to be thinking about. And also this idea that welfare will lead to the end of use of animals because the costs will increase so much, and but that we have seen is unlikely to really happen. That the cost will rise enough for people to completely stop buying products. But I think in terms of finding common ground, I think the reason it is so important is because, like I said, it is the use of animals is not black and white. It is embedded in a very interconnected, complex, economic system, social system, political system. So I think we need to really we need to learn to hold these tensions. We need to learn to not be so rigid with these questions that come up, because I think more interesting questions to ask than more than common ground is that can we find synergies? Assuming that we have fundamental alignment, can we find synergies? Can we do reform in a way that it doesn't cause any damage to the perception vis-a-vis consumption? Can we communicate better about reform work in a way that our fundamental philosophy that the use of animals is not acceptable, which is, I think, something that I can't say actually, this is something that most people would agree with, but at least within the movement. But can we start communicating about this differently in a way that there is a clear future that a clear alternative that we are proposing. When we're saying that there is something wrong with the way that we relate to animals right now in this exploitative framework, when we're raising that there is something wrong with this through all the different interventions that the movement does together, whatever the ideology may be, we need to articulate also what the alternative is, and is the alternative that we are we are all right for animals to be consumed, but in a higher welfare way, or is it that we want to bring because I do agree that there are so many animals, and emancipation is so I don't know when that's going to happen. So with the scale of suffering and with the number of years, we certainly do owe a responsibility to be able to respond to this. But what are those questions that we need to ask instead of can there be common ground? Can we instead find synergies, to be able to do this? And I think there are ways to be able to do that, structurally, to be able to do that individually. I think another factor that comes in here is not so much about ideology, but about the fact that the more rights and abolitionist approaches are often promoted more by grassroots, and the more welfare reform work is often done by larger organizations. Of course, that's changing. There are now national, international organizations that are working with a more abolitionist, rights-based approach also. But I think predominantly we are finding more resources, more funding. So there's also this hierarchy within the movement, which I think also feeds into this divide. And I think sometimes if I'm being completely candid, I think sometimes in these debates, in whatever forums about, whenever we're talking about an intervention and we think about what's the way to respond, I think sometimes our personal identities, our egos also get enmeshed in that discussion, which is I think unfair to the animals and to the issue, because I think we really need to be thinking about what is the way that we find those synergies. And a great example is, I worked on the campaign to get dolphin area banned in India, and we had a great team, and we were, and this would be considered a welfare reform single issue campaign, which would not be abolitionist in nature. But then, we were careful with our language, and ultimately, when we got the government to put the ban in place, the language that they used was recognizing the potential of cetaceans to be non-human persons, and I think and that is now being that now gets cited internationally as a great precedent for advancing the the intrinsic value of animals. And of course, I know it is cetaceans and there's whole other sort of, rights versus welfare perspectives on that. But the point I'm making is that it is possible to find synergies. It is possible to find synergies if we are willing to hold those tensions, if we are willing, because I think that's really a more important and interesting question to ask vis-a-vis veganism, abolition, and welfare reform.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bada.
Thanks.
I see
Few
it.
things. Yeah, I think there have been welfare reform changes in 200 years. It's not like the world has been. I think just a example that Varda gave in itself contradicts saying that, well, things haven't really moved. So obviously things have moved in the past 200 years. So to say that, well, welfare or work overall in preventing suffering is a failure for the past 200 years, I think is a bit unfair on the overall ecosystem that's been working. The second, I can just look at even the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act in India for 1960 before what it was, where, you had to have suffering happening in front of you to be an offense. And now it's not that. So there are a lot of changes that are definitely happening. And if you're thinking that the common ground that everybody who cares about animals need to come to an understanding is that it's a pathway to abolition, but I'm not necessarily sure that that common ground actually exists. So it might exist amongst few people, but I'm not necessarily sure that there is a general effect. For example, with me at least, it wouldn't exist to say that we all need to agree that somehow the welfare work is a recipe for this great time that's going to come for animals, where animals are going to be given rights. It also goes with the issue that people have very, very different relations with animals, as in, people who, again, when we look at people who raise animals, and there are factory farms, there are smallholder farms, there are backyard farms, there are native farms, there are pastoral communities. Human relationship with animals is very, very, very complex. And I'm not necessarily sure that we could put this into one particular pipeline to say that, hey, this is abolition is where we want to go, and welfare is the way. I think what we really need to be looking is, are we all in agreement that pain and suffering in itself is a bad thing? And we got to be reducing pain and suffering. And what we do is the most tractable way with high impact to reduce pain and suffering. So that might mean the most tractable way currently to reduce the suffering of a large amount of animals is to get them out of cages, where you confine them in battery cages. It could be, even in that, it could be to implement cage-free commitments, which are in 18 months from now, these cage-free commitments are due and companies need to be doing. It's the most tractable. So the test that you're really looking is, we all agree that pain and suffering is a bad thing, and we got to be reducing it. And again, let Hannah speak more on whether we are looking at a 5 domain, 5 freedom, how that is going to be measured. I know that Welfare Footprint Project is doing a whole lot of work on that as well. And where does the sentience lie? What is the effect of enrichment? Again, that in itself, the study of human-animal behavior is a developing study. And I think that standards are evolving and capacity is evolving constantly. And I think that if we are in a general agreement that whatever be the final approach that, what one would want, which is a personal thing, that we as a movement want to be reducing pain and suffering, and if it's a bad thing, and we then look at where is the largest amount of suffering by far is in factory farms. Even with that, we can be sure that it is egg-laying hens, chicken meat, it is aquaculture, shrimp, where there's no stunning, some of 4, 5, and maybe even insect, if you were to really look, where the most amount of suffering happens. And we have a tractable way to reduce the suffering. And this suffering reduction is documented. We know that the life of these animals are better, and we invest in that rather than being so fixated that to be in the journey, you somehow need to agree upon where the destination is. I think the destination is just reduction of suffering. What the personal destination for each one is, I think, is separate for one another. Hannah?
Thanks, Jaya.
Sorry,
I'd love.
So sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to offer a clarification, if I may. Is that, Dan, is that all right? Just wanted to offer a clarification on the 200 years of welfare reform. Just to say that, of course, 200 years of welfare reform has done a lot to reduce to reduce suffering. My point was that the fundamental point is that it's the way that people relate to animals in the framework of it is all right to use animals for whatever. And 200 years of welfare has not changed that perspective on our fundamental relationship with animals. That's what I believe 200 years of welfare work has not achieved. And I think that, in response to Nicola's question about, how is welfare reform a path to abolition? I don't think the destination, I don't think the destination and all those, I think we need to, of course, all collaborate as well. There's such few of us. But it's not to say that welfare reform, it hasn't really changed the fundamental relationship and the idea that it's okay to exploit animals. So just wanted to offer that clarification because Jaya was referring to that. So sorry, Hannah, please over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think this is a really nuanced conversation that we're having. And I think that the language that we are using can also be interpreted in a number of different ways. And so that's something that we need to be really careful of in terms of trying to find those synergies that you were talking about, Vada. So there's a couple of points that I wanted to talk about. The first is, I don't believe that animal welfare is a pathway to abolition in terms of utilizing animals in whatever way in the human-animal relationship. I think that animal welfare is about eliminating suffering, so the abolition of suffering for sure, but not necessarily the utilization of animals in any form, because that could be domestic pets, that could be in our food systems, that could be in our entertainment, it could be in some form of conservation activity. I think the next thing that I wanted to point on is, Vada, you mentioned something around our food system and changing our food system. And that, I think, is something that where we can find some really good synergies. We know that animal welfare is highly interconnected with our society, our environment. Climate change is a really huge impact, and we know that animal agriculture is one of the biggest impacts on our greenhouse gas emissions and our climate impact throughout the world, and that's related to overconsumption and the way that our society is evolving in terms of consumption of a number of different things. And so from the synergistic perspective, I think that we can all agree to say that our system, our food system, and our global way of consuming animals and other sorts of commodities around the world drastically needs to change. Not just needs to change, it needs to completely reform. It needs to be completely changed. And so I think that that's something that where we can find some synergies. And I think it's also, really important for us to internally reflect on some things that have and have not worked. If we talk about animal welfare incremental movements, often we can find that sometimes they, might lead to industry or, factory farms adapting and changing some things or changing some standards, but ultimately the root cause is still there, and animals are still in a system which is promoting suffering. And so we know that some of these things have been unsuccessful, and they haven't resulted in clear, large-scale change that results in the better welfare of animals. I think to counteract that, we need to look at actually where we want to go. And I agree with you, Jaya, that ending suffering is what we need to be looking at. To have that common ground that we want to end suffering in animals, and what that actually looks like in our animal-human relationship is really important for us to define. And that's why we're really looking at things like, what does it mean for an animal to live a good life? Can we have animals in a food system? Can we have animals in our domestic pet system? Can we have animals in our entertainment or wildlife conservation systems where they live a good life? And that's not just something that where they're not necessarily suffering, or there's that sort of you talked about the 5 freedoms versus 5 domains. It's not just the protection of cruelty, it is actually the promotion of a full and fulfilled life for the animal. And so we need to really define what that looks like. And I think that's where we can find a lot of synergies in the work that we're doing, because that's really ultimately what we want for animals. We want animals to live a full, fulfilled life, that's something that's meaningful to them, and looking back at the animal's perspective. And so how can we disrupt and reform our food systems, if that's what we're talking about, to ensure that that happens? And I think, that's really where we can find the synergies and look at what has and hasn't worked over the past 200 years and ensure that we can take learnings from that and move forward. But I'm keen to hear what the rest of the panel thinks on this, question as well.
If I can chip in, just wanted to add a couple of points. I think to answer Nicola's question, my understanding and my view about abolition, the relationship between welfareism and abolition is different from, let's say, Hannah here, because I do see welfare as a path to abolition, but that doesn't mean that, but the fact is, even if there's that difference, I respect that difference of opinion and I respect that both approaches can work. I think we have to admit that not a lot of resources have been spent to analyze what has worked and what has not worked across the world. And even if it may have worked in one part of the world, it may not end up working in another part of the world, right? We cannot simply supplant solutions from the Western context to countries in Asia, for instance. So I think if having the humility to accept that we don't know what might work will allow us to have space for diverse perspectives. Just because we disagree on the path to reducing suffering should not mean that we can't come together and collaborate to reduce that suffering. So what I would say is that I agree with Jaya and Hannah here, that all we need is an agreement that we all want to reduce suffering. Now, if someone believes that there is an ethical way we can still have a relationship with animals, that's okay. I can believe differently and still collaborate with them to reduce as much suffering as possible in the here and now. So that's something I just wanted to emphasize.
Agree. I like that.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's all really, really good thoughts and comments. And I'm so sorry for asking all the really difficult questions. These are normally asked and given as comment in our movement. We also receive some comments on our posts or when we talk to people as well. Some people say oh, you're protecting animals, but some people are still seeing as a non-vegan. So people say you're protecting animals but you're still eating another animal. So my next question is going to address that. And do you think that non-vegan people can advocate for animals?
I can take this. Of course they can. I feel like I think diet changes or a person's diet is no litmus test in any stretch of imagination on their ability to do. And I think there is not one single path to help animals. I think Ford did more to help horses than all of the ASPCAs put together by just invention of cars, or maybe invention of electricity did more to protecting whales than all of the International Whaling Commission's work put together. So in that sense, I think there isn't a single path saying that, all right, what's a litmus test? You're vegan, then you're somewhere good. And I think being diet changes no litmus test of a person's own ability or ethics as well. So I think it does come at a as in, again, it's one's personal choice, and I feel like one should not be limited. And again, I also do think that a lot of times within the movement, we tend to paint people who are farmed animals, saying that, oh my God, animal farmers must be very cruel. No human being, at least most sane human beings, don't wake up in the morning saying that, okay, it's time for me to hurt an animal. Let me put this chicken in a cage. Let me take a hot beak and hot plate and beak trim this animal. People don't do that. in the sense that a lot of times is normalized. A lot of time people don't know what the options is. And a lot of times, even with like especially smallhold farmers, there's a huge bond between the animals and themselves. So in the sense, like it's very, very, very complex. It's very complex about how humans and animals interact. And the way they consume the animals is no indication at all about how what their moral compass stands.
Thank you
If I
for it. Yeah, sorry, Apurva. Go on.
Sorry, is it okay if I go ahead? Okay, so I just wanted to add that I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that cognitive dissonance is very, very real, and be accepting and kind towards people. Just sharing my own journey. 10 years ago, I started as a very angry vegan, telling everybody how they were horrible people for hurting animals. But over a period of time, I realized how counterproductive that was. It was alienating people from the cause. It was just hurting people and not helping animals in any way. So I changed my strategy. I decided to be kind, compassionate, talk more about it, but in a respectful way. And that started changing people's attitudes around me. And that's something I've noticed worked well. But just wanted to sort of emphasize that veganism is an individual journey, and not everybody goes vegan overnight. Some people have a transition period, and I've had a very long transition period. And what I tell myself when I feel angry at someone, treating an animal in a certain way is that it took me some time to get to the place that I did. So everyone is on their own journey, and whether or not they are vegan is not a test of how committed or how much they care. Often we all started with caring about our pets. A lot of us actually started caring about animals because we had a dog or a cat. And it slowly grows from there. So I think looking at veganism as a person's journey instead of an event that, or as Jaya said, like as a litmus test that they need to pass in order to advocate for animals is a little unfair. Just as an example, like food, as Vardha was talking about, is deeply interconnected with our socio-cultural lives. So if a person, let's say, finds it difficult to give up non-vegan food, if they want to stop using leather, if they want to stop using animal testing, and they want to be an anti-vivisection activist, can we stop them, and should we stop them? Do they not have a right to advocate for animals who's suffering terribly in these labs and research facilities? So I personally don't agree that veganism is the test or is the virtue that we need to have to be able to work on behalf of animals. I think we need to be, I think, more welcoming and open. Like, we need more people in this movement. And I don't think we should spend any iota of our energy in alienating more people. Yeah, those are my 2 cents.
I would love to add to that if I can, and I really love your perspective there because, in working in animal welfare science, I've often been kind of in the middle between veganism and animal activism, and then industry and people who are working with animals every day in the way that we utilize animals. And I agree on a couple of points that. I truly don't believe that there are people that are going out there every day saying that they want to be cruel to animals. And every one of the farmers that I've met, whether or not they work in smallholder farmers or they work in a large factory farm, or people who have worked with animals in other sorts of scenarios as well, I truly believe that they are trying to do the right thing. And the difference in their opinion about what the right thing is, and is a cultural a background, the way that they've grown up, and a knowledge base as well. That everyone's on a different journey. Everyone has a different understanding of what they think is right or wrong, and that's a personal ethical opinion. And there are a lot of people that are really willing to learn and to take on new challenges. And I've found myself being kind of in the middle between lots of different grounds. It is about understanding where a person is, you know, in that journey, and trying to meet them where they're at, and find out if there are ways that they are wanting to advocate for animals and how they're advocating for animals. I've met several farmers that have made some really important changes in their industry, you know, for the animals that they're working with, and that's something, you know, that hasn't changed, you know, the system, but it has changed the lives of those animals that they're affected with, and has changed the lives of the people that they work with as well. And then, of course, you know, I've met a lot of people on the other side that have really challenged the views and challenged the ways in which we think about things, and make sure that we are actually going, well, is this enough? Is what we're doing actually making the change that we want to see? And I think there's no reason for anyone to have a certain particular view about veganism or what they choose to consume for them to be able to advocate for animals. And I think we see that every day in the world, in a number of different industries and a number of different ways in which animals interact with humans. So yeah, I really like that. You know, we need to be kind, and we need to bring more people along. And I think we need to, you know, open up the conversations as much as possible, rather than creating space for argument, because we do know, you know, there's a lot of evidence around human behavior, and you know, the idea of changing people's mind is, if we start being too argumentative, they're just not going to want to listen regardless. So, you know, whether or not what we're saying is true and correct, if we're fighting with them too much, they're not going to want to listen. So yeah.
Thanks. I just want to add one. I mean, I agree with you know, with what's being said. You know, I mean, I think this gatekeeping of who can advocate for animals and who cannot is it just needs to end. You know, I mean, because I think what's already been said. You know, I mean, we are alienating people, and you know, and I think there are lots of groups outside. I mean, there's a large number of people who have positive, more progressive views towards animals. Lots of people who have pets, for example. At least in the Indian movement, we don't work very closely with the whole pet animal lover, dog lover community. You know, I mean, there's this whole thing of, oh, well, you only love dogs and you don't care about farmed animals and so on. But, you know, to me, when we are fundamentally talking about ending oppression of animals, it doesn't, you know, I mean, this sort of gatekeeping seems counterproductive, you know, because this is just like animals, just like are embedded in these systems, so are we. All of us, we are embedded in the same systems, and it is something that it is going to take time for us to evolve collectively. And some people might be vegan, some might not be, some might like dogs, some might like, you know, but it doesn't matter. You know, I mean, I think the fundamental point is that anybody who sees that the current systems are not, you know, these need to end. The current animal exploitative systems need to end. Wherever they are on that path, you know, I mean, we all need to be moving together closer toward that. You know, finding ways to work together. And I think another reason why this question comes up, that can vegans, you know, advocate for animals or not? I mean, I think it's also because we tend to sort of like look at it from a very, that if I'm an animal abolitionist, I am that forever, or welfare or rights, or, you know, and of course there are fundamental positions and beliefs that all of us have. But I think also it's important to look at every issue as it comes up, and to really see how can we synergize, how can we find ways to strengthen whatever we are doing in response to the different issues that we're working on, using every single approach we have to our disposal. I mean, this is given the minority movement that we are, to not use resources, to not use different perspectives, to not use different tactics, is you know, sort of is shooting ourselves in the foot. You know, I mean, if not for the compassion and the kindness and the empathy that we should be showing to other people, as Apurva and Hannah have been saying, even just sort of more selfishly to advance something that we believe in, that animal exploitation needs to end, we should not be taking away resources. And you know, I think this sort of rigidity is perhaps, you know, between the rights versus welfare, is, you know, leads to this sort of gatekeeping, which has very unfortunate consequences, you know, for the animals, most importantly.
I just wanted to add one thing, Tan, and if that's okay. I think it's also important to look at veganism as an evolving concept. Based on new knowledge, based on new information, things change. A couple of years ago, I thought all brands of coconut milk are vegan, but apparently some are not. Some coconut milk brands use monkeys in the production process. So they may not be entirely vegan in my definition of veganism, where I consider animal labor, things produced with animal labor, as non-vegan. So does that mean I wasn't vegan 2 years ago? I don't think so. So I think if we can sort of give ourselves that benefit of doubt that this is an evolving process, I think we can also give that benefit of doubt to people who don't identify as vegans. And I think, again, it all boils down to compassion and empathy towards other people as well. I heard this at one of the conferences I was at, is that sometimes animal people forget that humans are animals too. And I think just remembering that while interacting with people who may not be, in agreement with us at this point of time, and while dealing with them could really help.
Yeah, definitely, and totally agree with all of you about veganism being the personal choice. And I even like it's not even like even bigger than personal choice. So I can name many organizations even who started working with just companion animals, and now they're expanding their work to farm animals and to freedom of all species. So that's like we need to rethink and even like change the way we call things, definitions, or like terms in our in our movement. And there's another question that's very relevant to this topic in the chat. It's a bit about strategy. So how do we fit like and balance both messages in our animal advocacy for animals? One is calling for improvement in some parts of animal life used by human, and the other is to end the total oppression of animals by removing the system. It's tricky and strategy involved thinking, but I hope you can answer this.
I can go. I don't think there's a need to balance it. So whatever is the intervention that you're working on, and whoever, I think the idea really is that who's your target audience, what's the message, and who's the messenger? That all really matters. And I think if, for example, if you're looking at changing consumer behavior, all that really matters is let's say if you're asking them to choose all protein, then tasty, cheap, and convenient. That's the only message that really matters. Everything else is broadly doesn't matter. Or if you're asking a company to start sourcing cage-free eggs, then I guess reputation risk, risk of like sourcing from low welfare farms, and the potential impact that it can have on like shareholder value, perception of a company. That's the message that you want to be pushing out. So I'm not necessarily sure that one needs to balance it out. I guess like we figure out what's the most impactful solution or intervention that we want to enforce and implement, and try and identify what's the most tractable pathway to reach there. And then you identify what the message is and who the messenger is. And there probably isn't a need to balance it out, saying that, oh my God, how do I balance this message on like welfare reform? Will the abolitionists get angry? Or if I were to go on abolition approach, will like the welfare reformists get angry? I think like as I started off, this conversation of like welfare versus abolition doesn't happen anywhere beyond Instagram, Facebook of animal activists. And it's a moot question anywhere beyond this. So nobody's really asking this question to start with. And the second thing is that finally, everything boils down to what is the market going to accept? Is the market going to accept a plant-based product? Is it going to accept a higher welfare product? Is it going to accept a product which has got monkeys used for coconuts? Is it going to accept a forest that is part of deforestation? Again, this is everything finally depends on how the market's going to react and how are we able to create those market incentive mechanisms to have an uptake, because finally, the true litmus test for everything is market profitability. If animal welfare, reducing suffering is not economically viable, it's just not viable. So I guess that's all it all boils down to.
I'd like to add to that as well. I think I absolutely agree with that, and I think it is such a nuanced sort of question that we need to ask in every region of the world, and I think the important thing for me is understanding where we are creating these divides and silos in what we are doing, and understanding and identifying where those are and breaking those down. What we really need to do is make sure that animal welfare, or whatever we're trying to do in terms of ending suffering for animals, is integrated in all of the work that we are doing. And so in particular at World Animal Rotation, we're looking at the much broader system, not just animals anymore. We need to look at how the animals interact with our environment, our climate, and our people, and our economy. And it really does come down to how can we make this a viable solution to feeding the world, to reducing our climate crisis, and protecting animal welfare. And we need to have ending animal suffering as a key part of that solution and demonstrate how that can work. And by creating these silos, creating these barriers ourselves isn't really helping us. So we don't necessarily need to identify how and when we would utilize veganism versus animal welfare. I think we need to just start broadening our perspective and breaking down those barriers and pushing our message in various different ways, and understanding where that is appropriate in each different context. For example, it might be that we're reducing animal consumption and replacing it with a plant-based diet, which is primarily vegetable-based diet. Or it could be that we're looking at animal alternative proteins, whether or not it be some form of lab-grown meat or fake meat or something like that, depending on the market and where that is profitable. But the ultimate goal is we're ending suffering, but there are different pathways to take there. So I think that's sort of the key message in terms of breaking down those barriers and utilizing different solutions.
Yeah, that's very important and great point. And on changing the way we work and working in silos, it's not helping, and being divided is not helping, like animals in the building the movement. I'm sorry, Vara, I just saw that you wanted to add some points.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think drawing upon what Hannah said, I think it is a very nuanced point. I mean, I don't think there is a single response to there's a single template to that. I think I mean, when we're speaking to the government, for example, for a particular reform campaign that could be behind the scenes and so on. I mean, can I don't think, for example, there is a way to integrate those two messages, that we want to improve conditions of animals, but at the same time, we're also talking about ending a fundamental farming system, which is normalized right now. So I don't think in all contexts it is possible. And I think this is also most relevant when we are talking to the public. I think largely because I think the challenge, the reason why this question comes up is because for anybody who feels that okay, well, animal exploitation needs to end, but then you also see that there are all these trillions of animals right now who need we need to respond to the conditions now, and then you sort of for every issue, and like I think Hannah was saying, and at different points we've all been discussing this, that this is something that is so issue specific, so campaign specific, so intervention specific, that it really depends on the issue there, how we talk about this. And the problem only arises when there is an intervention that can potentially further normalize the exploitation of animals, and then how do we, and I think that's where the challenge is. Say for example, if we're talking about about happy meat, does that further, is there a way to raise the issue at the same time, that well, it's okay to eat happy meat, but then it's not, but at the same time you're also saying that you can't exploit animals. So I think that's where this arises, and I think in some cases it's just not possible. And I think it really depends on different organizations, different individuals undertaking different interventions. How do they want to really communicate about it? I think a balance is certainly possible in some situations. And by a balance, I simply mean, talking about the need for welfare in the here and now, which is of course important, but at the same time, raising that we do want to see an end to the exploitation of animals. I think that is possible in some issues, in some campaigns, and it is also not in many. And how do we want to engage with those? How do we want to undertake those areas of work is something that we need to ask ourselves, I think individually and also structurally, collectively as a movement, whether it's organizations, if there can be structural changes, can there be, can there be, for example, in boards of organizations, can there be good representation of multiple perspectives, because right now we see welfare reform and abolition and veganism and, everybody sort of like in their own groups. Can we have more integration there of thoughts of, sort of really sitting down and try and think about what would be the best way, again, for animals to be able to talk about these issues. So yeah, I don't think there's any single template that exists or can exist for something like this.
Great, Farah. Thank you for your additions. And yeah, there's no black and white answer, so it's really difficult as well. So it's all come down to like personal information, though, how much information they have, and based on that information, they can make their own decision. And we don't need to make things more complicated. We don't need more infighting within our movement. But we also have another really difficult answer. It's when it comes to cultural Asia Western context. We got asked, or some people commented that, but even like going vegan and veganism in some Asian societies, people view that as an idea that is introduced by the Western culture. So if Asian culture, we don't have terms like vegan. What are your comments about that?
I can start on this one, since my master's thesis was about examining the relationship between religion and animals, and that's when I got exposed to what different religions say about animals. But I don't want to just talk about religion, but also history. So yes, there is a perception there in many Asian countries, this is a Western concept, and that is far from the truth. I think if we go back to our religious traditions, at least I can talk about India. I've studied at least 7 major religions that are prevalent in India, and all of them talk about kindness in some form or the other. There are contradictory practices, of course. There are contradictory texts within different religions that say different things. But at some point, there is definitely some reference to our relationship with animals, and it's all about kindness. I can provide references of actual verses from the Quran, from the Guru Granth Sahib, from various religious texts that talk about how we shouldn't be hurting animals. So that was one thing I wanted to emphasize. In the Indian context, if you look at Mauryan history, so in 4th century BC, there were codes about protection of wildlife in the Arthashastra by Kautilya. There was a Mauryan emperor called Ashoka. Who had one of the largest empires in the Indian subcontinent, who converted to Buddhism, and he installed edicts around the country which talked about how people need to behave with animals and how his subjects need to be kind towards animals. So there's a rich history of animal kindness towards animals and compassion towards animals in Indian culture that is often overlooked. And similar work is being done by people like Altamash in Pakistan, who's looking at how Islam and veganism are compatible. And all I'm saying is there is a lot, even though the common perception is that these are Western concepts, if we can harness and go the power of our traditions and history, I think we have a lot to learn from those. At least I can only speak about India, though.
Thanks, Apurva. I can go. I think I'm not sure like something being Western is a reason for it not to grow. Like in the sense, like look at the growth of QSR in Asia, like KFC. There's KFC everywhere. Like you go to China, deep inside China, you have Starbucks, KFC. Like when you look at the growth of Yum brands, when you look at the growth of Taco Bell, the growth of KFC, McDonald's, and so on and so forth. I feel like is veganism or being Western a real impediment or an excuse finally? Because I think like there hasn't been for a market uptake something being Western. Like it's in the remotest part of Asia, you can still find a donut, right? In the sense, like what is Western, what is Asian broadly. I think where the real issue comes up is on the development of alt meat in itself. It's just that where the development of alt meat is happening is in the US and European context. So you see a lot of ground beef, you see a lot of chicken nuggets, which are already battered, which is not the way battered deep fried chicken nuggets, which is not the way Asians would consume meat, right? As in there's a lot of fermentation, you have whole chicken, you have whole duck, you have century egg. So you're not really eating a just egg. So I guess like the big disconnect that really comes up is primarily because the alt protein companies, be it Beyond, Impossible, so on and so forth, are primarily targeting that huge US demographic because that's where the consumption really is for them at this particular point of time. And the dollar goes much shorter when it comes down. So there's not a really big reason for downstream marketing to happen in Asia broadly, other than Singapore and maybe parts of China being an exception. So what you're seeing is that the Western concept comes in the fact that those vegan alt proteins are not necessarily ready for Asian diet. For example, in Singapore, the most common thing that you eat is chicken and rice. So the chicken and rice, the chicken that you would buy from Beyond is not compatible to the chicken and rice that people would eat. So I guess that's a problem. I think that's like a scientific problem that one needs to solve as to how do we create those alternate proteins that can fit into the platter of Asian cuisine. As far as Western, I think if you were to look at the growth of broiler industry in India, India is now the second or third largest producers of eggs and chicken meat broadly. In 1980s or early 1990s, there were no broiler farms in India at all. Like the broiler companies, because people had been never used to eating this soft, fleshy meat because they were used to eating native birds, which were a lot more hard, a lot more fibrous. So the broiler companies set up stalls and gave out free chicken to people, saying that please eat it, please eat. And they developed a palate for these birds were started at 45 days, where now the slow-growing birds, which are part of the better chicken commitment, people are like, oh my God, slow-growing birds, they're so hard, they're so something that we can't really eat them. But then that was basically what people were eating before. So you do see, and again, I keep going back to markets, be it Western cuisine, be it Asian cuisine, be it how the culture is. Finally, if there is a demand, the market will cater a particular product. The question that really comes up is that at the given conditions in which the Asian food system is, and again, that's not being a monolith. Singapore is obviously an exception where there's cultured meat. Like you could like go on Food Panda and order cultured meat to your house today. But Singapore being an exception, broadly in other places, how are we able to create those products that will fit into the Asian palate so that they're able to cook? But I'm not necessarily sure that a concept being Western in itself has any barrier in adoption in any country overall.
Thank you, Jaya. Any additional questions or comments?
Yeah, I'll make a comment as one of the Western representatives on the panel. I think that what I understand, in terms of the way that the world eats is extremely different. And so from a Western perspective, our diets are just very, very animal protein heavy. And that makes a huge difference in terms of the solutions to try and change that. And so the solutions are focused on these alternative meats. They are focused on these highly processed, nuggets and ground beef and things like that, because that is the way to try and target that demographic. There needs to be alternative solutions and alternative markets within that Eastern sort of perspective of how do we look at these different diets and how do we look at the way that these cultures consume food and work with their farmers and things like that to make that a more effective solution. But I do agree with Jaya that just because animal welfare writing may have come from a European perspective, that doesn't mean that it's not necessarily an important perspective to grow. And if we look at the country that I'm in at the moment is New Zealand, and the traditional owners of the land here, they have a lot of teaching about the intrinsic value and mana of animals. That is not something that was adopted into the Western culture that colonized this land. So I think that it's not just a Western concept of protecting animals and caring for animals, and regardless, I don't think that matters, because we all agree that these animals have an intrinsic value and that we need to protect the animals. We know that these animals have experiences in these sorts of systems. And so that is something that we should be focusing on and adapting the way that we deal with these solutions globally, based on the different cultural perspectives that these animals are living under.
Yeah, that's great additional comments, and thank you for that. And yeah, I'm sure that there will be many other questions that people will ask, and to divine on the two movement of the theories. So I'm pretty sure this conversation needs to continue, and I hope that this session has been very thought-provoking and answer many good question, good point that we have been facing so far. But there are still many other aspects that need to be explored. And I hope that we can cover that in the future sessions, like the way we use the language that we use, not only among ourselves, but among with people outside of our movement, and how to unite people, how to collaborate instead of being divided and alienate people. There are also some comments in the chat, very long questions, so I don't think we can cover them within our limited time. So if your question have not been answered, please email us, contact us, and I hope that the panelists here will be willing to answer your questions, and yeah, we can contact by email, and hopefully in the future AFA can host more sessions like this in the panelist or debate form. So yeah, we can be frank to ourselves and really debate ourselves for the animals. With that, I would like to thank you for all of you, for being the amazing panelists in our session, and I hope to see you in the near future in our AfA conference or event. Now I'm going to give the floor back to our host, Elliot.
Wow, what a session. Thank you, Tang, for moderating what was one of the, if not the most engaging and passionate discussions we have had at AfA Connect this year. What a way to end the series for 2024. Thank you to all our panelists. As we finish our last AfA Connect of 2024, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank everyone who participated over the year, the AfA team who have made this happen, and the people and organizations who joined us to learn and share their experiences. I will remind you that all previous AfA Connect sessions are available on YouTube, and I'd also like to share with you several events that are happening across 2025. If you could also all take a couple of minutes of your time to leave some feedback on this session, any of the sessions you've heard about, or about AfA Connect in general, we'd really like to hear from you. If you've ever organized events yourself, you'll know how valuable feedback is to making sure these events are really useful for you and the people in your organization. So make sure you scan that QR code to leave your feedback, or click the link that's been just provided in the chat. In 2025, we're going to have a different series of online events with the second year of International Macaque Week, the return of Asia Farm Animal Day as an online event, raising awareness, and a day for capacity building for organizations across Asia. And we'll also be highlighting regional efforts on World Rabies Day. Please see our events page or join the AFA mailing list for those updates. And our big event for next year, which we're all excited about, is the AFA conference, which will be hosted in Taipei. The AFA conference is Asia's largest gathering of animal protection and advocacy organizations and is open to anyone who wishes to connect on how we can create a better future for animals. I hope we get the panel today that we had reappearing next at the conference, because that'd be fantastic to have you all there again. Next year's theme is reflection and breaking boundaries, from farmed animals to wildlife trafficking to animals used in labs and in entertainment. We have sessions tailored for everyone involved in the movement in any capacity. Registration opens very soon, so make sure you keep in touch to make sure you get your early bird tickets. But if you're interested in presenting in one of the sessions at the conference, abstracts are now open for submission until December 10th. So please scan that code for more information or follow the links also in the chat. The sessions are mainly designed as practical workshops, so they can be as tangible and useful for as possible for the organizations who join. The AfA Farm Animal Coalition will be hosting several farm regional events in 2025, starting with an India regional event in February. And there'll be also regional events in Indonesia, Nepal, and Pakistan. These regional events allow organizations within a country to get together, share challenges, opportunities for collaboration, and allows for a united and collaborative movement. So if you're based in one of these countries and are interested in joining, again, please get in touch with anyone at the Farm Animal Coalition, see that events page we've been dropping in the chat, or make sure you sign up to the mailing list. And finally, if you need something to listen to as you're on your way to work, make sure you check out the AFA podcast if you haven't already. I really recommend it. The episodes we have released are absolutely brilliant, with guest speakers from around the region and around the world speaking about all sorts of animal-related challenges, from veganism to the dog meat trade, fake animal rescues, content on social media, to protecting animals in disasters and conflict zones. You can check that out wherever you listen to your podcasts now, or you can also see it on the link that we've just posted in the chat. And that's it for 2024. Thank you to everyone who spoke at AfA Connect today and yesterday. And thank you for everyone who joined us over 2024. I hope the rest of your year goes well. And we look forward to working with you all next year as we continue to unite our voices for animals. Goodbye.